You're listening to The Art of Imperfect Adulting. I'm your host, Amy Stone. Here, I share stories from real people navigating the adventure that I call adulting. Are you ready? Me too. Let's do this. Hello, friends. In this episode, I'm going to introduce you to Doctor Gila. We talk about how one single word in a conversation with an acquaintance inspired her to make a change in her professional life. It's a little bit oversimplified, to be honest, but it's also the crux of the conversation. Along the way, we discuss the challenges of parenting philosophies, the feeling of isolation a lot of adults feel and experience, and even have a delightful conversation, if I do say so myself, about road trip snacks. Are you ready? Me too. Let's go. Dr. Gila, welcome to The Art of Imperfect Adulting.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yay. Are you ready for a chat?
I am so ready. And I have to say, imperfect adulting, I feel like I'm the poster child. Like, yes, that is me, totally perfectly imperfect in the adulting world. Yeah.
I love it. All right. So I begin most of my interviews by asking the person on the other side of the conversation, where do you call home? What part of the world are you in?
So right now I'm in Cold Spring, New York. It is about an hour to an hour and a half north of New York City. And the weather is rapidly changing right now. So
Very cool. Very cool. So before we dive into the topic of the day, I like to get to know people a little bit better. So tell me as little or as much as you want about yourself outside of work. It can be related to your family, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a hobby you have or the nicknames of your pets, whatever you want to share with us today.
oh my goodness, big, broad question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big thing about me is that I'm a single mom. That is a big part of my identity. I also think as a like big picture thing, we grow up thinking that our lives are going to be like this sort of logical, straight trajectory, and mine has been anything but, and it's been an adventure and a ride, and I've lived in lots of different places and have multiple degrees and a few different careers, and so it's been fun, and also I'm now older and
Wiser.
leaning into more of the rooted lifestyle. So
Very
um
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think that this is not that we're not to the topic of the day, but I don't know that I've ever really talked to very many people who've actually experienced that linear path.
I know, right?
I think that we all have this idea that is foisted upon us by, I don't know, fifth grade teachers or something. That's like, if you follow these steps, this is going to be your path and it'll always be there. And
Mm-hmm.
there's also rumors that that used to be the case for people long ago, but I don't meet very many people outside of the very obvious, like people who are on sort of preset tracks for surgeons and things like that. Science,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to be a if you want to go to Mars, you've got like one path and one shot. But other than that,
Mm-hmm.
it's like most people sort of wander around and change their mind
Yeah,
and then deal with the struggle of that because you feel like you've taken a wrong turn and you've done something wrong. And that everybody
100%.
else is doing it right except you.
Yeah,
But
100%. And I think that that's highly relevant to the work that I do because I support mostly single parents of what I say beautifully complex kids. And so often what we thought life was going to look like, right, when you're 12 years old and sort of imagining and daydreaming about what your adult life is going to look like is probably very, very different than what it looks like. And I do think we're sold this bill of goods, right? We're like, it's a disservice that there are so many messages about like what is quote unquote normal, what is
yes.
expected. And it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking everyone does this, and social media doesn't help, right? Like
Right.
everyone goes to the beach for vacation. Everyone has, the white picket fence lifestyle. And I just think the reality is so far from that. And it doesn't do anyone any good to pretend otherwise.
I agree. I do. And we could talk about that all day, but you picked a different topic for today's conversation. It's aligned. It's definitely aligned. We'll come back to this kind of thing before. So we are going to talk about a time in your life when somebody in your circle described a toddler as naughty,
Mm,
and that somehow directly or indirectly inspired you to add parent coaching to your professional bag of tricks.
Yeah.
And so, does that sound like a fun conversation to talk about today?
Sure, yeah. And it was a pivot point for me, but certainly not an isolated pivot point. So the context is that I started out as a psychologist and a neuropsychologist. I actually originally was a medical writer and editor, speaking of convoluted trajectories, but then I was a psychologist and a neuropsychologist. And what I like to tell people is that even with all my fancy training and experience and degrees and all that stuff, being a single parent to a strong-willed, I will say, and a beautifully complex kiddo was challenging, is challenging, right? And
Yeah.
it, even with all of my background. And so I did a lot of work on really trying to figure out how to meet his needs the way that he deserves, and to do it in a way that is aligned for me, and to figure out what that even means, right?
Right.
And to do it in a way where I don't lose myself in the process, but to figure out how to navigate this. So I did a lot of work around that, and really I was always interested in what I call connection-based parenting. But I really took a deeper dive into that when we hit some challenges, some behavioral challenges and some social challenges. And so in that process, I did become even more sort of passionate about this lens of seeing kids through this compassionate lens of that they're struggling. They're not bad kids. They're not giving you a hard time. They're having a hard time, right? They are struggling and they deserve our support. They're not misbehaving and deserve our punishment. And so it really shifted a lot of things for my relationship with my kid, for his behavior, for my own life. And so it was, and I was still on that path. It's always a work in progress. And that
Yeah.
was, I would say kind of towards the beginning. And so I was still like knee deep in really actively working on this. And I saw a child psychologist talking about her toddler and saying, "Oh, I can already tell he's going to be naughty." Right. And
So the word naughty
mhm,
impacted you, the word
it
choice.
it just really it struck me. And I want to say, this person I'm sure is an amazing parent, and I'm not,
Yeah.
I don't even know I don't know the specifics of their parenting, but just this notion of, especially a child psychologist, using that lens of, which is understandable because this is what society trains us to do. This is
Right.
the typical message and the way that most of us were raised. And it's the pervasive lens that we are surrounded by. And it just really in that moment like smacked me in the face. And I just felt this passion ignite of I want to do something about this. I feel called to almost like protect these kiddos, right? To support parents in the struggle, because again, I don't think parents are failing or doing something wrong. I think that we are doing the best we can with the resources that we have available. And for most of us, those resources include really deeply ingrained messaging
Right.
about kids being naughty and manipulative and misbehaving and defiant, and all of these really critical words. And that lens, I think, really it prevents us from being able to really show up for our kids to support them in the challenges. And again, that's nothing is black and white or extreme. And
Right.
but
Nothing is
I
black and white. And
yeah.
we can bring it back to this concept of normal because normal is a moving target, right?
Mm-hmm,
It
mm-hmm.
absolutely shifts based on what we've experienced in our life. If you grow up in a house of vegetarians, that is your normal, right? That
Totally.
is your normal. And if you go to your neighbor's house and they own a butcher shop, I don't even know if those exist anymore, but like they're,
They do.
heavily meat. Okay, there you go. Heavily meat based. That's their normal. And neither one of them is actually right or wrong. However, if you shift from something that feels normal to you into something that's foreign, the perception, the experience can feel very wrong.
Yeah.
It feels strange. And
Yeah.
so when we talk about that, sometimes having somebody reflect back to us what the perspective of choices is gives us an ability to figure out where our normal slides into the choice that we want to make. But
Yeah.
other times it's, we're looking for a normal, like what are other people doing so I know what I'm doing and whether or not it's right. One of the things that, as somebody who, not everybody goes through the parenting experience, and not everybody who's listening to this will be a parent of any kind, but we all have parents, right? This is this very, very strange thing that all of us have parents. So we, by default, start with, okay, well, what it means to be an adult. Does that come with parenting, right? And for me, I had this concept that the adults around me growing up knew what they were doing. And
Hmm.
then when I got to that point in my life, I was like, oh, no, they did not.
Uh-huh.
Nobody knew. And I don't know. And that felt very wrong. I felt like I should know.
It's the imposter syndrome, right? It's
Ah, and
yeah.
flying, but parenting for me and step parenting has very much been, building the plane as it is rocketing through the air,
Yeah.
figuring it out as I'm going along. And I'm sure there were people out there who knew how to do it before they got there. I'm jealous. But the reason I wanted to mention that is that you are a person who had a significant amount of education,
Hmm.
and still you were in a position to identify what your own philosophies were when you got to the point where you were actually
Yeah.
parenting your kid.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I like to say that, not to sound, highfalutin, look at all my degrees, but to validate for parents that, even with a PhD, this is hard stuff. Right? Like
Right.
this is, it's challenging. And I want to say to your point about even if someone is listening, they're not a parent, I think a lot of my work about parenting and with parents, I am very often pointing out that it almost all applies to adults too.
Yes.
And, there's so many parallels, first of all, in interacting with ourselves, right? And second of all, in interacting with other adults. And the same summer that naughty comment really struck me, it might have even been the same week. I was listening to one of Brene Brown's. It's like the only Brene Brown thing I've ever listened to. I'm not like a huge Brene Brown fan, but there was something that she said that really struck me because this was actually shortly after my son's dad and I had separated and he moved across the country. And um, there was something that she said that really struck me that is aligned with this. And it is, I'm paraphrasing, basically that she studies people who like wholehearted living, I think is her term. And she said
Community.
there's two like big mindsets that many of them have in common. And it's like a yin yang, they go hand in hand. One is they see people's behavior and they see the world as everyone is doing the best that they can.
Yep.
So this ability to sort of give the benefit of the doubt and to have that compassion and empathy. But importantly, there's a second piece, which is that they also recognize and give themselves permission to set their boundaries, even in the context of understanding where something is coming from. And I think the same is true with kids and with
Yeah.
relationships. It struck me because this was, I think, in my relationship with my kid's dad, I think I spent a lot of time um, leaning too much into the empathy piece because I could see where I can understand where it's coming from. I get it, right? And so having compassion and empathy for that and not really giving myself permission to do that second piece of I understand where it's coming from and it doesn't mean that I have to stick around for it, right?
Right. So let me give a metaphor that I think explains that, right?
Yeah.
if you're a bad driver and I see you as being a bad driver, that's the best you can do. And
Mhm.
I can acknowledge that, okay, this is the best you can do. But separate and aside from that, I can decide, you know what? I'm going to take a cab
Yeah.
because it's you being a bad driver. That's the best you can do. And we all have that every single day. That's actually a separate decision of whether or not I want to get in the car with you.
Yeah. I love that. And drunk driving also, right? Even
Sure.
more so, right?
I thought of that before my
Yeah.
brain went to that while I was coming up with the metaphor, but
Yeah.
it is exactly that same thing. It's like choosing not to get into the car. Sure.
Yeah. I understand why you are not going to be a good driver in this moment.
Yes.
And
And
I'm
I
not
choose.
going to put myself in that situation. And
Right.
the
And with
same,
kids, when they're having a
yeah.
meltdown, it's like, okay, dude, you're 4, you don't have the skills to regulate. I totally get it.
Yeah.
And also, this is annoying the ever living crap out of me. And we both need to retreat to our corners.
Right.
You get to watch 15 minutes of whatever nonsense is on
Right.
television, and I'm going to sit in the corner and get myself together.
Yeah. And I will say when it comes to a adult child relationship, there is a little bit more of us as adults like supporting kids, um, working on our own discomfort in that moment so that we can show up and support our kids. Having said that, right, as opposed to an adult relationship,
Sure.
although
It still
you
happens,
still
right?
want to
It
work
still
on that.
happens. Yeah.
Having said that, I think that it is a very common misconception that connection based parenting, peaceful parenting, gentle parenting, whatever you want to call it, that it is permissive and that you can't have any structure or personal boundaries or
Right.
anything like that. And I think that that is, one of the biggest misconceptions.
The other thing I tell people like so now, my youngest kid is now an adult. So it's been a long time since I've been in this situation. But I mean, when I'm talking to people with young kids, and if I was to choose a parenting philosophy, it would be to that I one of the things I think I shifted between parenting philosophies, as the day went on.
Yeah.
Peaceful from 10 to 10:30. Kidding. But one of the jokes I would have is I was like, listen, there's not a person, no matter who you are or what you know or how much you've practiced it. I don't know anybody who can be in, Target with 4 kids under the age of 5 the week after you have the flu in the middle of rush hour and somebody has a tantrum and not lose your ever living mind. Like you're going to hit a minute at some point in your life where you're like, you know
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
Monkeys, let's go. We're out of
Yeah.
here. No candy bar for you. And that's it.
Yeah.
Try again tomorrow. And you can put yourself in a position. It took me a long time. You would look at people who are like, oh, well, gently do this and so on and so forth. And I'd be like, yes. And then I'd be like, well, obviously I suck because at 4:35, when the witching hour starts, I don't have the capacity to
Yeah.
do that anymore. And I was like, it must be me. And I'm like, no,
Yeah. Yes.
actually, this is real life.
Yeah.
And, we do the best we can. And
Yeah.
like, so yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
And I don't think, this is part of why I don't actually typically use the term gentle parenting because, right, it suggests that everything's always gentle and,
please move
easy
away
and
from the ledge
lovely
of
and
the cliff.
right. Yes. So I use connection-based parenting. If I like the word that I think actually best captures it, but I'll tell you why I don't use it, is respectful parenting.
Yeah, yeah,
And
I get that. Yeah.
I don't use it because I think respect is one of the most misunderstood
Right. It
terms,
gets observant. Like, yeah,
misused.
yeah,
People
yeah.
use respect to mean obedience,
Yes.
compliance,
Yeah.
deference, right? And
Deferent.
that's
Yes.
not what I mean.
You're not being
Um,
respectful. Yes.
mhm. But
Yeah.
really, the way I define it is, seeing and treating the other person as if their perception and experience and voice are valid and worthy, right?
Right.
And everyone deserves that, whether they're 2 weeks old or, 97 years old.
And being respectful doesn't mean you have to agree. Like you
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
right. And so I don't know how old your
Totally.
son is, but when you get to the point where kids are they're asserting themselves and their own opinions about things, they will have opinions and they will do things
Mhm.
that you won't necessarily agree with. And one of my very favorite stories about this, which is funny, and that's why it works so well, is one of my kids was pushing back on doing math homework.
Mm.
And they were like, I'm never going to use this. I don't understand why I'm going to have to do it. And that was their opinion, right? And
Mhm.
I looked down at what it was, and it was two-digit addition and subtraction, decimal and two-digit. And I was like, listen, I am an artist, and there are 1,000 times where you would have said this and you would have had my full support. But this, as it turns out, is money, and you are going to use this
Yeah.
every day of your life, and you have to sit down and do your homework. So I see your point. I respect your argument. Very, very valid. Tush in the seat. Get it done.
Yeah, but they didn't have that context, right? Like,
They
so
didn't
you
have that
were
context.
you were able to add information to the system in
Yeah.
a respectful way, right?
Like if they had shown me the quadratic equation, I would be like, yes, true. Never once used it ever after I finished my calculus class. Don't understand why I had to learn it. Still to this day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nonetheless, it's better to get it done.
Yeah.
So, very good. So, you were a neuropsychiatrist,
Psychologist.
psychologist,
Hmm.
and a clinical psychologist
Hmm.
before you added parent coaching to your skill set. And the
Hmm.
parent coaching was somewhat inspired by this observation of this person using a word that you reacted to in this scenario. What about parent coaching? Why did you feel a need to add parent coaching to your other skill set? Is my question. I know
Yeah.
many people do that, but I am curious if you're willing to speak to why you added it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to say here, but really at the end of the day, I think that I felt really passionately about I saw so many parents struggling. I knew how it felt. I was struggling for a long time, and I was so grateful for the support that I got. And I think that oh, I just I was just about to say something and I totally lost it. Um,
So we were
hold
talking
on,
about
it's gonna come
adding
back to me.
on to your
Yeah.
very traditional academic
So
resume.
here's I'm gonna zoom out for a minute. Here's like this might get deeper, but than you intended. But so it's super cheesy. But I am the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors.
Okay.
And I feel like that has always sort of like been this like low level vibration in my life. And that I feel really like I want to make the world a better place, which I know sounds incredibly cheesy. But ultimately, I increasingly like realized I think the way we make the world a better place is by raising generations who are more compassionate, more empathic, more emotionally intelligent, and able to self regulate and communicate. And the way we do that is by supporting their parents. Right. And so that's like the big picture piece. And then I just remembered the one thing that I was about to say, which is that part of me was like, I have done all this work and I only have one kid, so I might as well
Right.
help other parents, right? I mean, my father likes to tease me that I make a PhD out of things. He says,
Well, I was
um,
wondering, like, I did wonder because there was a chance there were people, I love to like learn things and rack up
yeah,
certificates. So you could have
yeah,
just said, yeah, somebody sent me an email and I was like, yeah, let's add it on.
I am totally a certification hoarder. Absolutely. I love learning and I love and it is, I think, partly related to that imposter syndrome, right? You're like
Sure.
constantly trying to like master whatever it is. So yeah, I'm sure that's part of it too.
So that's very good. All right. So how did your life or your experience shift after you have the observation, you're like, I am reacting to this word naughty that this person who's in the industry of teaching people how to speak about their children, which I think is not the most helpful thing I've heard this week. And I'd like to offer another solution. How did your life change, professionally or personally, when you started coaching parents on your with your ideas?
Mm. So first of all, I talked myself out of it initially
Okay.
several times.
Who
And
am
then
I?
COVID hit.
Okay.
And then I still hemmed and hawed about it and talked myself out of it. And then I finally did it and I got a parent coach certification because I get a certification, right?
Yep.
You don't actually have to, but I mean, I like to get certifications. Um,
Me too.
and um, I think how did my life change? I mean, my life has changed a lot. One of the things is that also appealed about something like parent coaching is for my own life and my own flexibility. I am a single parent of a kid who doesn't just kind of wake up and go to, his regular public school and is happy and does his homework and goes to sleep. Like that's, and it's
Are there kids that do that?
challenging.
Because none of
I
mine
don't
do.
know. I don't, not in my life. So, it was challenging to have a clinical job where you're expected, you have to be there certain hours and you have to make up the hours if you miss them. And it just was quite stressful. So in a lot of ways, it has really affected my professional life to, have this personal situation. And the truth is that I've only just recently really started to understand the extent that that is true. I think I didn't fully like I guess I didn't really fully acknowledge it to myself, not just um and I think that it has really affected that. So that was one thing is that it's been and I feel like I have learned 12 new languages being an online entrepreneur. There's a lot to learn. And one of the beautiful things about being a parent coach is that, I feel like it can feel really isolating to be a single parent of a beautifully complex kid. And the more into the parent coaching space I am, the more it does feel it's clear to me that I'm not alone in this
Yeah.
and the more passionately I feel about helping other parents realize they are not alone in it. And I think that in the online world you can sort of find the people who are aligned with how you see the world and how you want to parent. And in your physical, like I am here geographically and the people physically around me, it's often harder. And so that can feel really isolating as well. So,
Right. One of the things that I will say as somebody who's been through it a couple of times is it definitely surprised me how isolating the experience of supporting kids and being a step parent and a parent can feel.
yeah.
And as I went through different waves of it, one of the theories I have aligns with your single parent thing. There's like I use the word mainstream just to like whatever your culture is and wherever you are, predominantly defined by your school organization or whatever your primary community is. There's like a mainstream of people who do a certain amount of things. So if you're in a traditional westernized school, you've got sports and you've got kids who excel academically. And anytime you have somebody who veers even slightly outside of that,
Mm-hmm.
that person then begins to feel, I mean, the word that really does fit is the marginalized. They're pushed out to
Yeah.
the margin. And you have the perception that you are unsupported and you need support. The really strange thing
Yeah.
about that is that that is where you find the people who need support.
Mm-hmm.
And so those folks feel like they're not there. And one of the places, so it happens with academics, it happens if you have a kid who doesn't want to do sports, team sports that are
Mm-hmm.
in schools, right? There's all kinds of sports that you can do. And they either find another group, the parent and the kid either find another group to glom onto, or they feel unsupported.
Yeah.
And it can really, really be a big impact on the success and the trajectory
Yeah.
of a family and a kid. And what's crazy about it is that I am pretty sure that if you look at the numbers of the kids, like if you were to statistically say, it's not the majority of people who fit into that box is the
Mm-hmm.
crazy thing. The bigger number is the people who are like, football is not for me. And,
Yeah.
like, but that still is the path. And so it's so important to have people who, and this is Brene Brown. She's like, when you share your story,
Yeah.
other people, hear it and they're like, oh my God, I am not weird.
Yeah.
And so when you stand up and say, hey, I'm a single mom, other people were like, yay, me too. When I was
Yeah.
like, I couldn't hide it. I was like, I'm the stepmom. People were like, hey, wow, there you are. Um, and so it is interesting that this whole representation and unity thing is so hard for parents. But
Hmm.
I don't know where it comes from. I mean, I thought it was going to be like, brunches and I don't know what I thought it was. I did not think that it was going to be what it is, which is sitting in your car waiting for your kid to get out of school, sitting in your car waiting for your kid to like come out of practice, trying to get everybody where they need to go on time,
Yeah.
not really surrounded by many other people, and sometimes being surrounded by people you don't really like,
Yeah.
but you're there in the room with them anyway because you're like, oh, well, all right, here we
Yeah. And I want to add, because you were saying like you feel really like you're not supported. I think there's also a piece that is very common where you start to think, what's wrong with me?
go.
Or
Right.
what's wrong with my kid? And what am I doing wrong? And one place where so I've one area where this has shown up for me somewhat recently is the area of school resistance and school avoidance.
School
And
avoidance is a big one. You probably feel
yeah,
like you're the only person, and
you
then you
feel like
run.
you're the only
Yeah,
one, right? And I'm like, my kid's the only one in this whole school who's having this. And people act like you're the only, like
that is the
they,
thing.
and they don't
Yes.
just act like it. It's not necessarily they act like your kid is the only one who is avoiding school, but it's like, well, every kid doesn't really like school. I'm like, no, that's not like there's degrees and there's differences in the
Yeah.
experience. And I have to tell you, like, people right now, like I feel so much differently about it. I feel like there are so many families who struggle with school resistance,
Yep.
school avoidance, school refusal, school not being a workable solution, a workable or like traditional schooling
Mm.
not being a good fit. And you're sort of made to feel like you're the outlier, you're doing something wrong, there's something weird or wrong about you as a parent or your child or how you are handling it. And I want to say, if anyone is listening and feeling that way, I mean, I see it. Like I think 99% of the parents that I have spoken to recently, it's been amazing. I don't know if it's just like magnetic, but like everyone is struggling with school resistance, avoidance, refusal, school behavior issues, struggling
Yeah.
with. And so we have this perception that like, well, this is just what school is like and kids just like do it and that's what happens and you go on your way. And there's so many people that it's not an easy and
And they
good
just
fit.
disappear. Wouldn't it be like a fantasy if the people who were the professionals in the school were to acknowledge it and just say it to you right off? So four kids went through my family. I have seen all of them struggle with organization at the age of middle school, which is when that happens. Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, that's not true. One of them is an engineer. They did not struggle with organization. So, okay. So that kid was hardwired for organization from day one. But the
Yeah.
rest of them, they go through a time, it is when they learn, right? Is when they
Mm-hmm.
learn. Every single time. Like, so in the first time I was a step parent, I wasn't super involved, but like just, hammered by the teachers and the administrators, like, oh, well, this is how they should do it. And you feel like you're not doing enough. By the time we got to the last one, I'm sitting there, and they're like, well, they should just write it down. I'm like, no, come on, guys. Like you're the professionals who work with these kids all the time. This is
Yeah.
absolutely age appropriate. This is when
Yeah.
they're supposed to be. Like, don't make it such like a do or die situation. Like, this
Yeah.
is when you're learning it. You have these 2 or 3 years to practice and screw this up, and we're going to work with you. And if they just presented it like that, then you wouldn't feel like you were screwing it up,
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. And also like a little acknowledgement of the range of human
yes.
experience, right?
Yeah.
Like every skill has this whole bell curve, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not this one data point and everyone is right here in the same spot. And even normal, I'm using air quotes if you're listening to the podcast, right? Like whatever
Yeah.
normal means, there's still a huge range within normal limits, as we say, right? Like
Yes.
within expectations. And I think there isn't enough acknowledgement of that.
I do too. I do too. And I like by the time, I'm ready to graduate out of the education system, which is why it never gets any better because once you're out, you're very much like, okay, I've served my time and I no longer need to beat my head against the wall with this, which is a
Yeah.
terrible thing for the people who come after because the problem's just like
Yeah.
repeat, repeat, and repeat. But at the same time, like, I mean, they have just beaten me down.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm out, I'm out.
Yeah.
All right. So we could talk about this forever,
Yes.
and go on, but we need to actually wrap it up. So I'm going to ask you one last question about like the whole clinical psychology and coaching, because this is an area of confusion
Yes.
for clients. So like people are really well trained to know well, not really well trained, but they're aware of what psychology and psychiatry and doctors, where they fit into the who we
Hmm.
go to for advice. And coaching is a terrible, terrible description of a service. It's like it means
Yeah.
everything and nothing all at the same time. Tennis
Hmm.
coach, running coach,
Yeah.
parent, nobody knows, right?
Yeah.
So you can tell me to buzz off about this if you don't want to answer it. But as a person who actually hits both of these things, how do you sort of navigate this line between what is one
Yeah.
thing and what is the other, and
Yeah.
where people go for what?
Okay, so I know you think you're asking a simple question, but you're not.
No, no, I know I'm not. I know I'm not. Like so that, and I tried
So
to make it like, how do you
yeah.
sort of walk this line?
I will tell you that I think I delayed officially becoming a parent coach by at least a year because of this question, because of my confusion and discomfort. How do I ethically and legally straddle that line? What is coaching versus therapy? How do we separate them? And I'll tell you where I am now, and it's
And that's all
probably an evolving,
yeah.
yes. So I think that, first of all, people who tell you, psychology or therapy, I would say therapy looks backwards and
Oh
coaching
yeah, yeah,
looks
no, no.
forwards.
Yeah.
They're full of BS.
That's it. That's right.
That is
Right.
not true. And with all due respect, like they mean well, but that is not a distinguishing. So I think that it is an overlapping Venn diagram. And I have had to work on being comfortable with that overlap. I think that when it comes to relationship coaching, most of what we do in coaching could fall under the psychology umbrella, depending on the type of psychology that you practice. Um, in coaching, let's see. Okay, so I have lots of different. So part of it is a legal difference,
Right.
and an insurance difference. So for if you're going to use insurance for therapy, you have a diagnosis and you're working on treating the diagnosis. And in coaching, you should not be working on treating a diagnosis. So pretty clearly for coaching, you shouldn't be diagnosing and you shouldn't be treating a diagnosis.
Yeah.
Um, Having said that, a lot of the things that we do in therapy could be part of coaching, but there are things in therapy that I think should not be part of coaching. And to be honest, I see a lot of coaches doing things that make me uncomfortable as a therapist because to me, it does really go into the land of therapy.
Right. And what's funny is they don't know. They probably don't
They
know.
don't
So they're
know.
never going to get that. They're never going to draw the line there because they aren't therapists and they won't draw the line. They don't know that that's the line.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. They mean well and they don't know. And it can be a little, I don't want to say, I mean, it is a little dangerous there. And there are some, excuse me, there are some places like, especially when we get into like trauma work
Yep.
and anxiety work and depression work. So if there is a diagnosable problem that you are trying to treat, that is definitely therapy, not coaching. Um, but there is, I think, more overlap than
That's
there
exactly how,
can be more
yeah.
overlap
That
than, yeah,
is one of the ways that I define it. I say, like if you need a therapeutic regimen, like you need a diagnosis and you need a therapy with a
yeah.
goal, like the goal of the therapy when a doctor gives you a diagnosis is predefined by the doctor.
Mhm.
They're designating this is where you're working towards, and
Right.
this is how we get you there. And that's one of the places that I
Well,
personally draw the line.
yeah.
Like,
I just hesitate because that is a very medical model of
very
therapy.
medical
And
model. Yeah,
not all therapy is, especially if you're going through insurance, you have to play the medical
sure.
model game. But if you're not using insurance, and sometimes even if you are, it's not, the medical model has drawbacks.
Right. No, and
And
yeah. I just think it's an interesting thing because people will get into these discussions all the time with coaches or, with anybody else. People who are non-professional, they're non-professional, so they're not lawyers, they're not accountants, and they're not, doctors. And they're like, well, you can't do that. And I always think it's a very interesting conversation because it's like, that's probably true, but they don't know it. They
yeah,
veered into this area, it's like
yeah.
they
And
veered,
that,
and they're
yeah.
not going to be the people to self-regulate saying, oh, I'm not supposed
Mhm.
to give you tax advice. I didn't go to tax school, so I didn't know that.
Well, so, and that brings up, thank you. That brings up a really important point that I think is important for consumers to know. One difference between therapy and coaching is that to do therapy, you need to meet certain qualifications
Yeah.
and criteria, and there is oversight and regulations. Depending on where you live, for a lot of people here in New York State, like there's pretty much no regulations for coaching.
I
So
don't think, yeah, like none. It is the Wild West
it's the Wild West.
of,
Yeah.
yeah,
So your coach may or may not have actual training experience, skills
all
related
of
to
those
that.
things.
So it is challenging. So I do think that I do think being an educated consumer about it and making sure that you feel like you're in good hands is important.
One of the most established ways to like see the difference that I think is really interesting is in the diet space. So I came out of the fitness world, right?
Mm,
So in Florida, where I live, the only people who can actually give you a therapeutic weight loss prescription, which is otherwise known as a diet,
mhm,
are doctors and dietitians, right?
hmm,
And yet every single personal trainer, weight loss coach, weight loss prescription, the number of people who give diets and publish diets and do that is like infinite. Right? It's like
mhm.
infinite. Come follow like this diet. Come
Yeah,
follow this. This will be your result. And it's
yeah,
like it's just absolutely like a disconnect. It's like, all right, it's supposed to be, like metabolic,
yeah.
but nobody follows the rules. Anyway,
Well, and I do want to say, like, I don't think you necessarily need a degree or a certificate. Like, I am sure there are plenty of really beautifully supportive coaches who don't have a formal like degree or training or
oh
something
yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me for one.
Yeah.
Like, but and coaches, this is not a rule or a truism all the time, but a lot of coaches are experienced based teachers.
Hmm. Yeah.
Right? They begin with their experience. They begin
Hmm.
with, and that can be supplemented by their education.
Hmm.
And that can be incredibly valuable, especially when you're talking about something that
Yeah.
is, how do I live through this?
Hmm.
Right? So it's not what does this look
Yeah.
like in the textbook, but it's like, how do I live through it? How did you
Yeah.
navigate through it? Can you be my co-partner and walk me through this as I
Absolutely.
navigate it?
Right.
And so yes, thank you for going down that road. You could have told me to buzz off and been like, no, Amy, we cannot talk about it. All right, so
I
tell
will say there's more to say on it, but it's
it's
it's more complicated than I think people realize. Yeah.
yeah, or not. Like, it can be both. But it's not clear.
Yeah.
It's not clear and it's not well defined. And maybe that's on purpose by somebody. Okay, tell people what you do. You support single parents and tell people
Mhm.
what you do and where they can find you. And then you have a fantastic special offer that I'll share with everybody.
Yeah. So I do actually have a virtual therapy practice. So if you live in New York State and you're looking for a therapist, I do that. But mostly I'm doing parent coaching these days. And I'm at drgilaparenting.com. I'm sure you're going to have the URL.
Yep.
I have a special interest in supporting single parents. I'm increasingly focused on that, but I do and have worked with partnered parents. And I will say, I hear so often, I'm a partnered parent, I'm married, but I sure feel like a single parent, right? I am
Yes.
basically functioning like a single parent. So um, I have workshops and private coaching, one-on-one coaching, and a group program called the SingleParentology Lab, and various other things. So the best way to find out about all of that is to hop on my email list, and you'll get a weekly email from me and heads up on everything coming up and usually discounts and stuff like that. So
Perfect. All right. That is really good. And the links will be in both the show notes and then also in the email newsletter that I send out, which is the best way to get those. You have a fantastic package of resources that is available to the audience, which includes a PDF guide, tantrums, meltdowns, and rages. Oh my. An audio guided meditation for single parents and a video, what every parent needs to know when the shit hits the fan. And so those all have special links and they're in the show notes. And then if you're listening and watching this while you're doing something else, walking on the treadmill, on your way to work, in your car, and you're not obviously going to write all these things down, go to imperfectadulting.com, sign up for the email community, and I email them directly to your inbox, and then you just click on them. You just click on them and they take you where you want to go. It's the best way to go. Now, Dr. Gila, time for the last 3 questions. These are rapid
Oh
fire
boy.
just for fun. I know
Okay.
this makes people nervous, but I do them for just for fun. This is like this is a brainchild of mine because I love stuff like this, but about probably 9 out of 10 people that
I
start
did
down
this
this
on
path.
another podcast and I could tell he did not like one of my answers. So one of he was doing free association words and one of them was marriage is, and I said optional, and he did not like that.
So funny. That's so funny. That's so funny. All right, very good. He wanted you to say something else. I have many stories about that, but that's all right. Very good. You spent a lot of time in school racking up all of these degrees, thinking way
Don't test me.
when you were no, okay. Thinking way back to elementary school. If you went to traditional school, which I actually don't know if you did, do you remember if you had a favorite cafeteria lunch? And if so, what was it?
We didn't have a cafeteria at my school.
You did not. So you just took your lunch every single day from home?
Took my lunch.
All right, what was the favorite thing that you brought from home for lunch when you were in elementary school, if you remember?
I honestly, so here's my answer. I have no idea what I brought for lunch, but I can tell you that my best friend always had one of those little packets that had like the little square of cheese dip and then crackers, like the
Oh, yeah, the little packet.
crackers.
And you dip it in or you spread it out.
And
you
we
love
never
that.
bought those. And I was like, ooh, those look really good.
But
I have no idea what I ate.
You were not paying attention. Okay, very good. That may not have been a very good question. All right, very good. So then on the school theme, when you were in high school, did you have a favorite like band or musical artist? And if so, are you willing and brave enough to share with us who you were a fan of when you were in high school?
I will. And you might be surprised. So Harry Chapin was my favorite in high school.
There you go.
Old school.
There you go. All right. Now, what is your favorite long drive or road trip snack that you can kind of buy along the road, like in a truck stop or something?
Okay, so my kid and I have our traditional road trip snack, which is the popcorners, the sweet and salty flavor.
Are those the triangles?
They're triangles.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's like one of our.
It's like the kettle corn flavor.
Yeah.
Those are delicious.
And we also like to do Sour Patch Kids.
You would be popular in our road trips as well. All right. Very good. That's it, Dr. Gila. You've been a wonderful guest today on the show. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening today. I hope that you enjoy the show. And before I go, I want to encourage you to become a bigger part of the conversation. Obviously, subscribe wherever you're listening to the show. Listen to more episodes. That'd be great. Again, please write a review and tell your friends about the show. That truly is a great help for getting the show in front of new people. Okay, but more fun for you yourself, head over to imperfectadulting.com and join the email community. You'll get some free stuff right away, and that way you'll begin to get the emails about the podcast. This includes the links for the special offers from the guests, and it's the only way to get that. Also, if you aren't in the mood to listen, I actually include an article directly in those emails. Whee! Now, if you love this and you crave more time with me, Amy, as a coach, a mentor, or just adultier adult, numero uno, check out The Village. If you have a story you want to share with the listeners, I'd love to hear from you. I have an open application. Just let me know you want it. And that's a wrap for today. Until next time, remember, the journey is the destination. Ralph Waldo Emerson said that, not me. Well, until just now, I did just say it. But what I want you to hear today is that if your adulting journey isn't going the way you expected, that may not mean that you're lost. It may just mean that you're on your way. This is Amy Stone, signing off. The Imperfect Adulting podcast is created and produced by Amy Stone and Amy Says So. Anything expressed on this show is offered as entertainment, and the views of the guests may not always represent the ideas and viewpoints of the host. That's me. Amy does not intend or hold herself out to provide professional advice or recommendations of any kind. In the end, you and you alone need to make those kinds of decisions based on your personal and individual situation, needs, circumstances, and comfort level.